Before I start my presentation, I would like to ask you all a question. Can you imagine living in a world devoid of humanity and independent thinking? I suppose many of us would dismiss this frightening thought in a heartbeat. However, this is not the case for the protagonist in a novel I'm going to share today. The book is 1984, which was written by George Orwell in 1948, and I would like to divide my presentation into three parts: the plot, the pros and cons, and its inspiration for me. Starting with the plot, it is set in 1984 in a totalitarian state called Oceania, in which the government controls the thoughts of the population and brings them into unthinking loyalty to its leader, the Big Brother. Unfortunately, the main protagonist, Winston, has an intense longing for truth and independence, and as a result, he resents the government's oppressive control and ultimately rebels against it. However, his little rebellion does not last long, and he is eventually arrested for re-education, which serves to root out his virtues. Now, being more familiarized with the plot, let's delve into the good points and bad points about it. Starting with the good points, first, I believe Winston's heroic pursuit of preserving his virtues is being magnified by the dire consequences the book depicts. For example, 1984 has put a huge emphasis on the effort Winston has devoted to prevent his rebellious acts from being discovered, as he knows it will only lead to a painful death. To me, I believe it adds weight and suspense to all his actions, as they are done under high stakes. And moreover, it is awe-inspiring for me to know that even though Winston has already weighed his pursuit of preserving these virtues against preserving his own life, he still chooses the riskier option of pursuing these virtues for mankind. And to me, as seen, he rebels in the first place. And the second good point is that 1984 is not cliché written in terms of plot. In the end, Winston's attempt to preserve his virtues is proven futile, as during his re-education, he willingly betrays his love to Julia in hope of ending his suffering. For example, he shouted, "Do it to Julia, I don't care about her," when facing torture. To me, the concept of Winston's will for self-preservation overcoming his virtues, though not expected, is not entirely inconceivable. And to my dismay, this demonstrates that our virtues are not invincible, and I will elaborate further in the message part later. Moving on, every rose has its thorns, and 1984 is no exception. The pessimist, I believe this pessimistic ending can give me the wrong message. For example, George Orwell wrote 1984 was a world to warn people about the dire consequences if totalitarianism is left unchallenged. And to achieve this, people have to be motivated to take action. Unfortunately, the dystopian way the book depicts the situation makes me believe that Winston, who still carries humanity and independence in himself, is the last flicker of hope left in his world, and it will be gone forever after his death. However, Winston's future attempt to preserve his virtues simply gives me the wrong feeling that a totalitarian government is unshakable and nothing can make a difference. And therefore, instead of prompt action that tries to salvage humanity in such a situation, isn't it giving us the wrong feeling that we should give up, as all our efforts will end in vain eventually? Moving on to the message, you may ask, in absence of a totalitarian government, how does 1984 relate to us? Personally, I believe our society resembles a totalitarian government in some aspects, as both of them seek to bend individuals according to the universal beliefs endorsed by it. And this brings us to the first theme, which is how we should respond when our humanity is being challenged by these prevailing norms in society. And to define humanity, it comprises of our aspirations and individuality, and let's wait no further and dive into it. First and foremost, our aspirations should not be impeded by universal beliefs. In real life, many universal beliefs are viewed as unwritten rules in society, and therefore society expects young people to follow suit. For example, when it comes to career planning, a survey conducted by the University of Hong Kong on teens' aspiration has found that a large proportion of parents, of around 65% of them, would judge their children for not conforming to the norms of prioritizing salary over interest, and this is where the problem begins. In 1984, despite Winston knowing his aspiration of restoring humanity is the morally right thing to do, he still chooses to renounce it eventually to end his suffering. And similarly for young people, despite knowing what they're aspiring for is facing a never-ending bombardment of judgment, despite knowing what they aspire for is conducive to their development, many of them still resort to conforming to end their suffering. And this gets me thinking. Living under a totalitarian government, perhaps there's no other option for Winston but to submit. But we have no obligation to make our world a totalitarian one, and the consequences will be dire if we do not take any action. Therefore, why can't we drop our deep-seated beliefs? We are open-minded to our aspirations by dropping our deep-seated beliefs. For example, in terms of individuals, on surface, both Winston and young people appear to simply renounce something that is precious to them. But on a deeper level, that means they are actually willing to give up everything, including their aspirations, morals, values, when confronting challenges and adversities. But what about aspirations that concern morality, like aspirations for building a better world, aspirations for promoting equality and sustainability? These aspirations, like others, do lead to a bumpy road filled with challenges and obstacles posed by universal beliefs. However, should we fail to uphold these aspirations, then progress in these areas will be stunted, and our world will face stagnation. And in terms of society, many aspirations come into existence to address the issues associated with our society. For example, in 1984, Winston's aspiration of restoring humanity tries to address the issue of a lack of human warmth in his world. And similarly, young people's aspiration of working as a freelancer tries to address the issue of a lack of fulfillment from the workplace. And therefore, this shows that if these aspirations are barred from execution simply because they violate some antiquated norms, then society as a whole will bear the consequences of losing these improvements that it desperately needs. And therefore, it does not take much to see that we cannot afford to conform to these universal beliefs at the expense of our own aspirations. Another equally important aspect is our own individuality. Only through appreciating the uniqueness and differences of individuals can we build an inclusive society. However, the totalitarian government in 1984 goes in the opposite direction by standardizing every aspect of its party members. For example, they are forced to wear the same uniform, they are forced to have the same daily routine, and they are forced to take up the same ideologies. And as a result, they are being made indistinguishable, and thus uprooting their individuality. And this, to my horror, I've realized that our younger generation is also moving in this direction too, and the results can be just as catastrophic. In Hong Kong, under the influence of idols and advertisements, many teens perceive the qualities possessed by their idols as standards that define perfection in one area. For example, having the appearance of a Korean pop star defines beauty. Unfortunately, this trait has slowly evolved into an obsession with making peers also conform to these standards. And facing peer pressure, I was also once tempted to shape myself according to these standards. But 1984 warns us that the consequences of losing our individuality is dire. as in the book, as no citizen is allowed to be special, they naturally feel insignificant and doubt their purpose. And similarly in real life, as only a handful of individuals can be considered to be successful by these standards, in terms of individuals, being excluded and judged inferior by these standards takes a toll on their self-esteem. And seeking to redeem themselves, many teens become eager to sacrifice their individuality and to morph themselves according to these standards. So for example, uptaking undergoing plastic surgery to make over their appearance. And doesn't this goes against our human nature of pursuing freedom, independence, and building our own identity and individuality? And in terms of society as a whole will become increasingly homogeneous as it disallows any deviations from the standards it endorsed, and as a result, the once vibrant society, which is built on the foundation of our own individuality, will be lost forever. Therefore, it's unwise to sacrifice our individuality for the sake of conforming to these standards. But, if we think deeper, why do we all conform to these standards in the first place? I believe the root of this problem lies in the lack of critical thinking in daily life. We simply follow what we perceive without thinking, and this brings us to the second theme, which is the importance of critical thinking. First, I believe critical thinking is crucial in safeguarding our interests, as taking in information passively represents an opportunity for others to manipulate our interpretation by controlling what facts are presented to us. And 1984 takes this to extreme. Whenever the totalitarian government fails to deliver its promise, instead of admitting incompetence, the government destroys all evidence of its past failures and empty promises. And as a result, only receiving positive information, the population is being misled into believing the government is capable. And this demonstrates that how easy our interpretation can be manipulated. And similarly, perhaps you may question the necessity of spending the extra effort and validating the information we receive. And 1984 tells us it's worthwhile in doing so, as the development in Winston's world grinds to a halt as the government is no longer obliged to fulfill any promises. And ultimately, it's the citizens' interest that is being sacrificed. And this tells us that simply believing whatever other tells us equals to putting our own interests at others' disposal. And for example, therefore, we cannot take it for granted that all the news we receive is unbiased and everything will turn out fine for us. And therefore, for example, in the ongoing Russian-Ukrainian war, all news reports on the casualty and the morality of this war are being censored on the Russian state media, while only broadcasting victories after victories. And as a result, the pro-Russians are being misled into believing they should continue to support the invasion. But with critical thinking, we'll be in a better position to sniff out the lies from the propaganda and be less susceptible to the deceivers. For example, ask yourself, is it too good to be true? And in short, it is imperative that we remain critical of all the information we receive, as in the long run, it will be us who suffer if we all get manipulated for others' gain. And to summarize, I believe our critical thinking safeguards our humanity, while our humanity drives our desire to protect our interests through critical thinking. And therefore, they mutually complement each other and are equally important. And to conclude, I would like to ask you all to recall the question I asked at the start. The reality is that if we don't take action, this unsettling imagination will become a harsh reality. And for example, and therefore I highly recommend reading 1984 as it serves as a much needed wake-up call for us. I believe the attack on our virtues is obvious to us when we are forced to renounce them under bodily torture. but many of us are indifferent and ignorant to the daily choices that will ultimately cost ourselves our virtues. Perhaps you may think that we can afford to lose bits and pieces for our temporary pleasure and convenience, but one day this irreversible loss will get out of control, and it will no longer, and we will pay the price once done paid to preserve the last bits of it. And our future hinges on actions we take today, so let's stay vigilant and protect this precious thing before it's too late. Oh my god. Yes. Finish. Before I end my presentation, I would like to invite questions from the audience.